start. Hi, Shashi. Welcome to
Hi,
the
Ranjit.
welcome to the Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum. This is our eighth one, and it's in 2020. Let alone the cliche of saying that 2020 vision has been a fantastic year for all of us. A lot of learning, actually. And one of the things that seemed to come out is we don't know what a pandemic is, and certainly we don't know what corona is. So I think, with that, sort of welcome to you, who we all respect and we think who would know maybe more about corona than others, but we won't sort of delve into that. We would rather sort of expand our discussions around naturenomics. And just to remind everybody viewing this, hi everybody, is that, Sashi was the first person when he was in the United Nations. I made an approach and I actually wanted him to become the chairperson as a counter to Davos to say that he could actually become the Secretary General of the Naturenomics Global Forum. And he, of course, rejected it and sort of threw it away, not because of anything. Either I couldn't afford his intelligence or I couldn't believe either of the two. But I didn't pursue it. I was a little sort of maybe overwhelmed by the first conversation that I had with him in New York. But, over time we've connected, we've remained friends. Albeit his political life and my sort of life and sort of business have met off and on, but not enough. And I would like to have many more discussions as we go into sort of retirement at some age when we are 80 or 90. So hi again, Shashi. So I think
Hello, Ranjit. Very pleased to be in conversation with you at the Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum 2020. I know the Bijapurkar Foundation is doing excellent work on the whole sustainable and inclusive growth of the Eastern Himalayan region. So it's wonderful to be with you on this occasion.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the main subject really here, and it's really a conversation and it's not really a quiz as to who knows what, because I know very little on the subject, even though I'm enjoying it. In fact, I'm sitting in Bijapurkar, meaning a place you came to at one time of your life with people who we both loved. And, it's a pity that you haven't been able to come back. So I'm sitting in Bijapurkar in the surrounds of green and peace and, I think hopefully far away from the hustle and bustle of urbanization, which has really been one of the models that we chose after industrialization to destroy the wealth of nations. In fact, the idea yesterday Shyam Saran gave me is that we should be writing the new wealth of nations, which is nature capital and natural assets around land, energy, waste, water, air, and carbon. You said that why not create the new format and not go into the 300 years of regime that centered around sort of New York and stock exchanges. So coming back, so economy is ecology, really, that's what we are saying. That actually, meaning economy is a total 100% subset of ecology. It's not only that, it's really meaning not even a byproduct, it is a fully owned subsidiary of ecology. And I think, when people are in denial mode to say that, they actually present what they call nowadays the finance budget, not only in India, across the world. I think actually people should be presenting the ecological budget and the ecological finances of the country, and therefore that's really the wealth people has, which adds on to the social dimensioning of people, which adds on to education, healthcare, and everything that follows about good life. It's not about just how much wealth you are. So our judgment is around GDP. Our judgment is around HDI. And the human sort of development index, which is totally judged by a Western eye, which has been ruling the humanity for about 300 or 400 years right now. So I think this is a subject that Ram also talked about, Ram Guha, in his ecological sort of nations, in which he's done a collection of books, which has been phenomenal. He did that many years ago. And that is also something that really inspired us. So I think over to you for your thoughts and sort of any other questions you may ask me, which I can throw back. I have 10 questions, but I'm not too sure whether I'm not too sure whether I need to use them, because maybe as we go along, it'll evolve rather than.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that what you're doing in the Naturenomics Forum and in Bijapurkar Foundation to raise this question of the economy and ecology is so vital. I think precisely because of what you mentioned at the very beginning, the COVID-19 pandemic, the worldwide economic slowdown it's caused. We've all got the figures of millions of deaths and the tragedies afflicting people everywhere. There seems to be a second wave in Europe and And America and India, I'm not sure that what number wave we are at, but there seems to be wave after wave. Even in my state of Kerala, which had overcome it initially, we're seeing bad news coming. And Delhi, of course, is the national capital of COVID. And with this, there's been a significant economic downturn. We know this, Ranjit, that 21 million salaried jobs have been lost in India. And the thing cuts both ways. In a paradoxical way, we all know, for example, that when there was a dramatic slowdown in conventional economic activity, industrial activity, that we suddenly saw, for example, the environmental miracle of clean air and blue skies in places like Delhi and the crowded cities of northern India. It didn't last very long. But for a couple of months, people suddenly realized viscerally how much our own economic activity had been damaging the beauties of nature and the convenience of clean air and decent living. I remember the astonishment when somebody in Jalandhar wrote about how they could see the Himalayas as their fathers and grandfathers reported being able to see 40 years ago. And here in Delhi, just being able to look up at blue skies was an astonishingly unfamiliar sight. Now that, of course, has changed as lockdowns have been lifted and everything else. But there is a paradoxical risk which we should bear in mind, which is that when economic disasters occur, and we've been going through an economic disaster of major proportions in India, then natural resource exploitation tends to be more likely rather than less. Because the economy is bad, people are trying to make money, make a living, whatever, hand over fist, and they go right into exploiting the natural resources around them, and environmental degradation could happen all the more. Now, I want to agree with you that, of course, we should rethink the way in which we conceptualize things like finance budgets and GDP and so on. In fact, the GDP debate, as you know, really went into overdrive when Bhutan came up with the idea of gross national happiness. And they said, why do we only look at gross national product? That means if you chop down a tree, you're increasing your GDP. Whereas if you plant a tree, you're getting no benefit to your GDP. Let's measure the value of the ecology in an idea of gross national happiness. And I think there's a lot of good work that has confirmed, quite frankly, that we should seize upon this present crisis of the pandemic as an opportunity to reset our economy and ideally the global economy. We cannot return to the old unsustainable ways of consumption and production, because pursuing immediate economic growth disregarding the environment is myopic and reckless. It's actually uneconomic growth because it's actually creating a decline in the quality of life. You know that the World Bank actually put some numbers on the annual cost of environmental degradation in India. They said it's about $80 billion. That's just environmental damage. And the truth is that when you look at our own government's policies, and I'm not playing politics here, Ranjit, if you look at the budget funding of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, which went up by 10%, it's vital to realize that this is still 52% lower than the Coal Ministry's budget. So that's the kind of priority in our country going on. And increasing funding means little without a plan for implementing meaningful climate-friendly reforms. What subsidies are we giving for electric vehicles, and what tax breaks are we giving? Similarly, what are we doing to dramatically accelerate solar and wind energy generation? Where is the disaster resilience planning in our environment ministry? I mean, I actually think the environment minister is much more on the ball, perhaps, than many people have accused him of being. But the fact is that that there's so much that should be done coordinating with other ministries, like the energy ministry, for example, the finance ministry, that isn't happening. On top of that, you must have seen, I know that Amitabh Kant is going to be part of your dialogue, that there was a recent report by the Niti Aayog in collaboration with the Rocky Mountain Institute. And issues like green logistics. You know, in our country, how much of our freight transport is road-based? And why is that? Very simply because our rail freight rates are totally uneconomic. We have the most expensive rail freight in the world, while we have the cheapest passenger rail tickets in the world. So that's a great thing by comparison with what it was like in the British times. But the result is we've driven freight into our highways. And 71% of India's freight transport being road-based is actually criminal, because you're getting fuel inefficiency, you're getting massive pollution. Most of these trucks are spewing emissions into the air. And if we could actually shift to rail, we would transform the economy as well as the environmental advantage. If you look at things like air pollution, I know you're aware of this. In fact, I mentioned it to you last year, that for 4 years now, on my own initiative, without any institutional backing, I've been trying to run a roundtable on clean air in Delhi. It's been very difficult to get buy-in from the powers that be. But finally, last year, the environment minister came and inaugurated it. And I've basically now taken a step back and let the leadership of this venture be with the TERI, the Energy Research Institute, and Air Quality Asia, on whose board I am. And they have collectively, they're creating another roundtable in December while the Balipara Foundation is doing its work. But air pollution reduces lifespans by almost 2 years around the country and about by 10 years in Delhi. And the huge economic costs have simply not been factored in. So we've really got to realize that ecology and environment isn't just something for people, long-haired beatniks kind of impression that the conservative politicians tend to have. The fact is that politicians really need to wake up and buy into what you're proposing, Ranjit, because when you're looking at everything from drought-struck farmers to flood-hit town dwellers, you're looking at how people, real people who are after all voters, are affected by economic failure. And if voters are affected, politicians ought to wake up. I've always been shocked by how little buy-in there is in the political class for the environment. I actually have chaired a roundtable now more than 4 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, on the issue of why is it that public health and environment, clean air, these issues are not enjoying greater salience in the political class. And the answer I basically got is when we go and campaign, voters aren't asking us about these things. They'll ask you about jobs, they'll ask you about the price of onions or tomatoes. They may be stirred by fiery speeches on identity issues, communal issues, and so on. No one is saying when you're going to clean up our air, what you're doing to give us better hospitals. No one is saying how are you taking care of the environment. And therefore, for politicians, it's not a priority. That's got to change too. And so it's not enough for people like you and me talking to each other. We have to get this message out to the Aam Aadmi of India, to the ordinary citizen, and say, listen, we absolutely need you to put pressure through your votes on politicians who will respect the need to fix the environment.
Okay, yeah, on that note, meaning that's a fantastic tip. I think a lot of elections coming up. What we are planning to do is give the environmental agenda to all the parties of the Northeast who are going to have this election, including Bengal. And we were very happy if you can help us to sort of see that it's the right thing that we're doing and it's the right political language that we are doing. But thank you for that. But coming back, there are 2, 3 very important points that you have made. You made a lot of important points, but 2, 3 that I pick up that resonate well with what we're doing. As you know, our conference has 5 objectives. The first is something which people have not been talking about. It's called animal, and human diseases, called zoonotic diseases. And one of the things that we have actually, this whole zoonotic disease, this is COVID is a zoonotic disease. And I don't see any press, any paper, any debate, anything with people who are shouting and screaming on TVs, talking about real issues like the zoonotic disease concept and really what it is. I don't think anybody even understands it. When I did,
it's animal to human transmission.
That's right. So, and that really is one of the things that COVID, meaning, has proved it is. And that links to forest, and that links to the more forest you cut, the more you'll have domestication of wild animals in all forms, from rabbits, snakes, pigs, etc. And that really is one of the things that we have not studied enough and therefore don't know. So we have actually commissioned the study, and we've got papers which people have written on zoonotic studies. We were quite surprised that there has been some thought on this. The second thing is employment. You see, while people are talking about a loss of employment, we have done a calculation, a back of the envelope for India and more so for the Northeast. We find that you can generate 30 to 15 million jobs just on talking about re-welling and farmering and actually understanding the entire process of cropping in India, and also the entire logistics chain, something that you referred to. I think one of the things people talk about logistics and pollution, what they don't understand is the loss of economic value is the loss of ecological value by that transportation, because you are actually spending more money, more water, and more food that is required in the cycle. So that cyclical bit is leading to a bigger understanding that because we're looking at economics the way the Westerners look at it, the way
Yeah.
the Brits did it, the way that post the agriculture revolution with energy, we created the industrial revolution, the technology revolution. This is our time to create the ecological revolution, and India should be in the lead of it. The forefront of this definition of changing our budgets to do this is something that we want. So we've got a key speaker who changed it for the corporate world. And he's a guy called Paul Polman, who was chairman of Unilever till recently. He, in fact, changed the way that you measure the success of Unilever. There is financial, there is social, there is pollution. And there are other metrics. And in fact, he went down for the first 2 years, got a rap from the stock exchange and delivery people because that's the only thing they knew. So we are actually reaching out to people who are saying, what is the new value? Because all of us, whether we like it or not, suppose I say my son is going to be a forest ranger. What does a forest ranger use? No use. Therefore, we lead to the next subject. It's called natural asset management. What is a natural asset? And to your point, a little bit of difference, a subtle difference, but an important one, is that if you have natural assets valued, today when debt cannot be mortgaged and mortgages are falling apart with material assets, the biggest debt you can raise is through your natural assets. So Arunachal, which has all the trees, if you just valued the tree standing versus sale, forget any other complicated calculation, or the fresh water that they give, or the food that they supply in terms of mushrooms, etc. And you can do a whole list. Forget butterfly management because that's something beyond us right now. But I think if you add it up, that is something that natural asset can give you debt. And today, the debt that can be raised on natural capital is something that the country is not even looking at. Forget the world is not looking at, but are beginning to talk about. So that is the third thing. The fourth thing is we're saying it is easy for corporates to be actually net zero in carbon by 2030, definitely by 2050. But India should take a target of 2030. In the Himalayas, fortunately, we are not Eastern Himalayas. We're not very industrialized. We missed that bus, fortunately so. So we can actually go into net zero by 2030. That means we will be the least carbon emitters, which is Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, whole northeastern states in Myanmar. That's what is the Eastern Himalayas. We've gone beyond the political boundary because we believe that geographically that's important. And now, lastly, we're saying there must be a way by which you talk about it in the form of naturenomics. Naturenomics being the interdependence between nature and economics. Therefore, what's the value you do? So you have a share value of, say, AX company, which is 100 rupees on 10, then we're saying that the actual ecological damage that they're doing in the whole value chain, including to consumption, is minus 30. So the actual share value is 70. So how do we bring about this measurement? And therefore, I alluded to this point. So
But
I think
Ranjit, yeah, sorry. I'm just going to say this is actually something that has had some interesting work on the whole concept of the triple bottom line, which John
yes,
Elkington came up with in '94. That instead of just focusing on profits, you also need to have social, environmental, and financial accounting in a company. And you end up with a triple bottom line of profit, people, and planet. And to my
right.
mind, that's a really, really useful analogy. If companies took on upon themselves the obligation to honor this triple bottom line, you'd get to precisely what you're suggesting.
No, absolutely. So I think they have actually done it, but we called it, because there is a nature policy in Netherlands, for example. In fact, China themselves, meaning irrespective of the fact that they may have other political designs and aspects which I'm not totally in agreement with the current government, but that's their issue. I'm not delving in politics. So I basically believe that they are taking that lead, and the next revolution, which will be the ecological revolution, which we call the Naturenomics revolution, is something that I'm offering the government of India to do, because it's not mine. It is they will the ones that will benefit. So coming back, so if these were the 5 objectives that we want, How would you advise that we go about actually convincing government, governance, compliance to this? Because we have a compliance mechanism. It's called the environmental impact analysis. And an environmental impact analysis, as you discussed, they're talking Subansiri River. They talk upstream analysis. What about downstream in a riverine civilization where siltation is taking place right up to Bangladesh? The river doesn't recognize boundaries.
Boundaries.
So I'm saying people are just not getting it. And I think while industrial revolution remained a very important part of measurement, how do we get this whole thing back on track to what you've said on people, profit, and planet? In fact, I've done an article for a global magazine on this, which has the largest circulation for people who are actually delving in the measurement of this. And we find that adding the Naturenomics policy would be absolutely, I'm not vying for the word Naturenomics, but I'm saying an interdependent policy of nature and economics would be something. And really, a person like you who has been in the kind of structuring, I think a little more delving into it, a little more leadership in this in Parliament. I don't know, meaning how you can help us, because I've got no other politician actually, except for the local ones.
Well, I've spoken in Parliament.
Consider you a politician. I'd rather, introduce you, and which I'll do before it ends, saying that, meaning Shashi is much more of an intellectual, a writer, and a person who thinks really for now and the future. And I think that's really what you are. You just happen as a profession to be a third-time elect from from Kerala, and you are a member of Parliament, which is great. But I hope you can change it the way you were ambitious enough.
The problem, to be very honest, Ranjit, is that though I've spoken about this in Parliament and the clean air debate, many of us were lobbying for some time, we got it, but it doesn't unfortunately have the impact in our system that it should. I mean, the honest truth is that we need the government, and it's critical for the government to take control of the severe environmental harm that's happening in India. So what we need to do with this is to alert them through voters and through public opinion, and to some degree, public opinion can be shaped by intelligent media and good writing. If we can start getting more media involved in taking this seriously, it can be done. We know that environmental degradation in our country has created a horrific environmental situation. I mentioned the 2 million deaths annually in Delhi. We all know about the Ganga and the Yamuna. The Prime Minister even created a ministry to clean up the Ganga, but where has it gone? What's happened? It's still shockingly polluted by industrial effluent. And it's because of irresponsible manufacturing techniques. It's always you put the GDP ahead of the G&H, as it were. I don't think we're trying to make it difficult for companies to do business. I think we're encouraging them to do business, make their profits, but do it so in a way that doesn't hurt the environment and doesn't hurt ordinary people. But the government can do something, and this is what we should lobby for, is to incentivize more green innovation in India. I mentioned this in terms of tax incentives and other incentives for alternative energy, electric cars, and so on. But when you realize how much is happening right now in the US, even in China, on green innovation, how little is happening in India, you do tend to get, frankly, a bit disheartened. I was reading, for example, that a couple of years ago, the last figure I could get, India filed 1,140 green patents. Same year, China filed 16,000. Now, this is the country of jugaad, frugal innovation. We are supposed to be able to figure out how to do things which are environmentally friendly, cheap, affordable, and can be implemented in our reality. We're just not doing enough. The latest figure I've got is that 13% of Indian high-value patents are linked to green tech, which is better than under 10, but it's still way behind US, China, Europe, and so on. So I'd like to see more green innovation. I'd like to see the government encouraging and rewarding it. I'd like to see more tax incentives for green innovation and green-oriented companies. I think if a company knows that they can also enhance the profit P by paying respect for the planet and thereby for people, they will have an extra incentive, because companies often say, listen, our only duty is to our shareholders. Why should we think about these other things? Well, the shareholders will be happy if you're benefiting from tax incentives. And equally, they'll be unhappy if the government imposes and implements rigorous sanctions for rule breakers on environmental issues, emissions, toxic sludge, all of this stuff. And I think that we should give massive encouragement to green sector FDI. Let's attract expertise from world leaders in green technology. And let's say you come in, if you come in and invest in anything, India welcomes you. But if you want to come and invest in green technology, we'll give you X, Y, Z, maybe tax holidays. I don't know. I mean, the financial people can work this out, but we need to do uh, much more on this. I want to add a word, Ranjit, before we wrap up on the Northeast, because I'm so impressed by all that you guys are doing. But you have your work really cut out for you. I mean, when you look at the fact that despite its immense natural beauty and environmental richness, the Northeast has suffered so much damage. I think people sitting far away from the Northeast don't realize, for example, that air quality linked deaths have been facing an appalling rise in the Northeast, that your forest coverage has been going down dramatically. You've lost about 2,000 square kilometers of forest in the last 5 years. That's a frightening number. I mean, I had no idea until I started looking this up in preparation for our conversation. And when you look at the fact that in the last 2 decades, 75% of the total tree cover lost in India was lost in the Northeast. Then how can we
Absolutely.
take any consolation by the fact that that we console ourselves and say, oh, look how dense the forests are in the Northeast. There's 70% of the land is covered by forest canopy. Yeah, but if you've lost more trees than anywhere else, it's not exactly the right trend. And we've seen floods in Assam this year. We've seen earthquakes in Mizoram this year. We've seen landslides in Arunachal, landslides in Meghalaya. I mean, clearly the earth is turning around and saying, hey guys, you've been harming us. And I must say that the weakening of the environmental impact assessment, even though I agree with your assessment of the assessment, the draft EIA notification has weakened it terribly. And I know there's a lot of pushback on that, but it'll be a calamity for the Northeast as well. But I just want to say that the Balipara Foundation, and I've heard particularly about your Rural Futures program, you've done great work with rural communities, and particularly in sustainable forest management, to which I really want to applaud you. And I think the huge potential that the Northeast has for both economy and ecology have got to be promoted together. I'll give you an example. Arunachal Pradesh, everyone tells me, is the nerve center of Indian hydropower. So that's economy. You can generate huge revenues, electricity, all of those things. You can even export from Arunachal across the border into Nepal, Bhutan, whatever. The point I'm trying to make is, if you are looking at that, you also have every incentive to make sure it's sustainable, that it doesn't damage the fragile and actually precious economy of Arunachal. So if we can do more to promote small footprint economic development in the rural areas of the Northeast, as well as some of these big projects like hydropower and so on, it seems to me that we can ensure that people will lead a good quality of life while at the same time we protect our environment. And I look in particular at things like agriculture. There should be so much more eco-friendly agriculture techniques than we're using right now. And that will improve sustainability, improve yields, avoid water depletion, avoid soil erosion, all the problems we're having now. And we've heard about from Delhi, the whole business of stubble burning in the neighboring agricultural states of Punjab and Haryana that have completely blanketed Delhi with smog and many parts of northern India with smog. This shows essentially that we have a very serious crisis in terms of how we are conducting our agriculture. And given that agriculture still engages more than half the population, it's essential for it to correspond to ecological best practices, because otherwise the cost is going to be paid by all Indians. And I think that's precisely my message. Let's help industries, let's help businesses, let's help agriculture, and let's at the same time ensure that we have paid attention throughout to the triple bottom line, to ensuring that while the economy grows, ecology is indeed economy, and that ecology is protected as well.
No, thank you, Shashi, for your time. And one of the things, just to reassure you, what we're doing in the Northeast because of this ecological downslide, landslide, if you may call it, is we are actually taken upon ourselves to plant 100 million trees, which will cover more than 30% of that loss. We have already succeeded in cover 5 million trees, of which there are 4 segments to it. There's a medicinal section, there's a food section, there's an economic section, and there's an ecological section, which feeds everybody, birds and elephants. And so we've done a very precise thing without manicuring it too much and without making it too industrial. So I think and the entire plots that we have chosen are totally run by the community. So for planting, the community gets the money, that's their income. And we have showed them the life over 10 years. And we've got great people supporting us, including HDFC Foundation, the Tata Trust. So we've been able to do that other than our own family foundations, which have been doing it. So I think your point to that is right. Your point on assessing the GDP, calling it a green GDP rather than a gross domestic product, the green domestic product. I think this will go a long way. But I do count on you, Shashi, as a friend, intellectual, as a person who's been writing so well, keeping us occupied, giving your views on meaning isms that are floating around, and what you call religion, which is ours. Our religion in the Northeast is the sun, the moon, and the earth. And we call it Doini Polo, by the way, in Arunachal. And that's what we practice by rewilding. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for your support. Look forward to catching up soon. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Great to be with you on this very special occasion. Keep up the great work, Ranjit.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. Bye.
Pleasure. Bye.
What changed for me was the idea of thinking about natural assets the same way we think about economic capital, as something that has to be added to and not depleted, exactly as we think in the world of business. Also, this way, the fact that it is more equal access for everyone in the community is something else that actually came home to me. I think Naturenomics is a way of thinking, it's a way of mind wiring that all young people, I mean the old ones need to learn it too, but especially the young people must learn about. And I will strongly advocate for a module each year at least to be taught in all the colleges, so that this is hardwired into all the other skills that we also teach in colleges. I also learned a bit more, and again everything is only a little bit more because there is so much that I don't know, but I also learned a little bit more about how complex and how much science there is into building back natural resources. And that is something that I think a lot of colleges that especially specialize in this area must offer far more intense training, knowledge, whatever is the word for it. And finally, what I heard said at Balipara Foundation, which was indeed very thought-provoking for me, was that it is how this whole thing is really actually global. We celebrate global businesses, but this whole piece of work is something that is global because the concerns are global. And the Eastern Himalayas, as was explained to me, no political boundaries. And the cooperation is across political borders of human beings, of different countries, and bringing them together is what Balipara is doing. So getting to know all this, I think, has definitely brought a whole new dimension to my mind space. I hope to be able to learn a lot more, and I hope to have the ability to humbly contribute my bit to it. This has actually been one of the more important, or I would say the most important discoveries for me for 2020, which in fact by this reckoning has been a pretty good year indeed. I have to confess that until I got to know Balipara Foundation, I thought economy and ecology were at cross purposes, and that improving one had to be at the expense of the other. I was both skeptical and intrigued when I heard the term naturenomics. And as I learned more, I realized that ecology and economy are both possible, and that good economics is about the whole cycle, building natural assets, as they explained it to me, and then leveraging it for incomes that can be used for leading more valuable and valued lives.
I'm Richard Hawkes. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Asian Trust, and I'm delighted to have been invited to say a few words at this 8th Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum. Globally, conservation and human development are seen as two sides of the same coin, and this is recognised within the major global frameworks and agreements that the whole world should be working towards. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are based on problems not being solvable in isolation. The 2015 Paris Climate Accord sets out a global framework to avoid dangerous climate change, and it acknowledges the importance of conservation in protecting carbon sinks. The Convention on Biodiversity set out in 2010 20 goals that nations are supposed to be working towards. These include the need to integrate biodiversity values into national poverty reduction strategies. Human-wildlife conflict is at the core of the COVID-19 crisis. COVID has brought to centre stage issues such as clear skies, pollution, and a greater appreciation and understanding of the implications of nature to the wider community. The migration caused by COVID-19 has increased human-wildlife conflict, for example through increased poaching to replace lost jobs and income. A focus on reducing human-animal conflict will be absolutely key post-COVID-19. South Asia has almost a quarter of the world's population, in addition to inadequate land and other resources. India supports 17% of the global population with just 2.4% of the land area, and 45% of India's cultivable land is arid or semi-arid or severely degraded. Poverty and growing populations are putting immense pressure on existing resources and threatening already fragile human ecology relationships. We cannot separate human development from our environment, nor is it desirable to do so. We need to think of the landscape and the humans living inside it as one whole piece, to be nurtured in a symbiotic relationship. The British Asian Trust merged with the Elephant Family last year, adding conservation to our focus areas in South Asia. The principles I've just mentioned are key to the development of our conservation strategy. And in addition to that, we recognise that people are as much a part of the landscapes as the ecology and wildlife, and vice versa. We take a holistic view of the landscapes we're trying to preserve beyond just protected areas. We recognise that local communities are the best preservers of ecosystems. However, for this, we need to ensure they are given economic opportunities that link back directly to these ecosystems and the resources within them. Striking a balance that allows for us to co-develop livelihoods opportunities with local people, whilst ensuring we don't overutilise resources beyond what is a sustainable point, is crucial. In India alone, 500 million people live in and besides forests. This is a massive challenge, but also a significant opportunity. Our approach is to work in partnership with all concerned stakeholders. Through approaches like these, we can integrate human and ecological development and ensure that one does not compromise the other. I hope that you have a great event. I'm really sorry that I can't be with you this year, but hopefully I will be there next year in person. Thank you very much.